I still remember the day my father told me I was no longer his daughter, as if those words could erase 18 years of memories, birthdays, and promises. I was sitting at the edge of my bed, textbooks open but forgotten, the spring sunlight spilling across my floor. He stood in the doorway, his arms crossed, eyes hard like stone. "Claire," he said, voice low, cold, "you're done. I can't deal with you anymore. You've made your choices, now live with them." I blinked. I didn't know if he meant it. I wanted to reach out, to ask him to explain, to tell him how scared I was, how small, how completely alone, but no sound came out. All I could feel was the hollow echo of my own heartbeat, and the weight of a house that suddenly felt too big and too empty. Looking back now, I can see how that moment was both an ending and a beginning, though at the time it felt like only loss. My mother had her hands on her hips, standing silently in the kitchen, nodding slightly like she agreed. I was 19, too young to fully understand betrayal, but old enough to feel it in the marrow of my bones. It was the first time I realized that the people who are supposed to protect you can sometimes be the ones who hurt you the most. I remember grabbing my bag, the strap digging into my shoulder as I walked out the door. I didn't know where I was going, didn't have a plan, didn't even think to call anyone. I just moved. Each step was heavy, every crack in the sidewalk a reminder that I had nowhere to land, no one to cushion the fall. That night I slept on a friend's couch, and the next morning I found myself scanning job postings, reading apartment listings, thinking about college applications I had always assumed would be easy with parental support. But support had vanished, along with the warmth I had always associated with my father. Those first few months were a blur of part-time jobs, cheap coffee, and the hollow hum of fluorescent lights. I learned quickly how to move quietly through a world that felt bigger than me. I took shifts at diners, learned to make change without error, and smiled at customers when all I wanted to do was scream. My first apartment was small, barely enough room for my mattress and a desk, but it was mine. I painted the walls a soft cream and placed a single plant by the window. It didn't feel like home yet, but it was freedom, or at least a version of it I could touch. Slowly, I began to build my life without him, without the man who had sworn I was no longer welcome. I registered for classes at the local community college, saved every tip I earned, and learned to cook meals that didn't come from a box. The world was harsh, but in that harshness, I found a kind of clarity. I wasn't just surviving, I was learning who I could be when no one was there to define me. Over the next year, I worked 2 jobs, juggling night shifts and early morning lectures, falling into bed exhausted but strangely proud. Each paycheck was a small victory, each completed assignment a quiet triumph. I began to understand that I didn't need his approval to matter, that my existence wasn't contingent on a father's love, and that I had a life worth fighting for, no matter how empty his house felt without me. There were nights when the loneliness came crashing down, when I wanted to call him, to hear a familiar voice, to be told I was still enough, but I didn't. I refused. The more I learned to rely on myself, the smaller the wound in my chest felt, replaced by something steadier, a resilience forged in fire. By the time I turned 21, I had graduated with my associate degree, landed a better-paying job, and rented a slightly larger apartment with a view of the skyline. I had friends who became my chosen family, who held me up when the nights were cold and the weight of abandonment pressed down. And yet, despite all the progress, there was a quiet ember inside me that smoldered, a mixture of anger and longing, of hurt that had never been addressed. I hadn't seen my father in years, didn't even know if he thought of me, or if the words he spat at 18 were truly permanent. Then, one evening, nearly a decade later, as I returned from work carrying groceries and the familiar fatigue of a long day, I found a car parked in my driveway that I didn't recognize. The engine was off, the headlights dimmed, but the presence of someone sitting inside sent a shiver through me. My heart started beating faster, irrationally, instinctively. I approached slowly, trying to make sense of it. And then I saw him, my father, his face lined with age, hair graying at the temples, his shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. There was no anger in his eyes, only something heavier. Regret, fear, desperation. I froze. He didn't move, didn't speak, just waited as if the first words would shatter the world around him. And I realized, with a quiet, cold clarity, that I had spent 10 years building myself into someone he couldn't ignore, someone whose life was no longer dictated by his approval. And that moment, that single instant, held the weight of every past conversation, every dismissed achievement, every cruel word he had ever said. I didn't know yet what would come next, but I knew that this was the reckoning we had both been carrying for years. I took a deep breath, set down the bags, and stepped closer, ready to meet the man who had once disowned me and see what truth he had come bearing. He looked up at me as I approached, and for the first time in years, the man I had feared didn't seem imposing. He seemed small, vulnerable, and entirely human. His hands were trembling as he reached out, not in anger, but in a tentative plea. I paused on the porch, the cool evening air brushing past me, and I could hear the faint hum of the city beyond my little sanctuary. "Claire," he said, voice breaking, I made a mistake. I was wrong." I felt a flicker of something I hadn't allowed myself in a long time, hope, but I quickly pushed it aside, tempered by a decade of lessons learned about trust and betrayal. "Go on," I said, voice steady. He swallowed, blinked, and then the tears started, slow at first, then unstoppable. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was being tough. I didn't see it. I didn't see who you were, and He choked, the words catching in his throat. I looked at him, taking in the familiar features twisted now by age and regret. There was the same jaw, the same eyes, but a humility that had never existed when he disowned me. I had spent 10 years imagining this reunion in every possible way, anger, confrontation, triumph, but I had never imagined witnessing such raw vulnerability. My heart didn't leap with joy, it hardened with control. I had grown into my own power, and nothing he did or said could dismantle it. "You're crying now," I said quietly, "but where was this when I needed you?" He flinched at the sharpness in my voice, but he didn't retreat. Instead, he nodded, tears spilling freely down his cheeks. "I know, I see it now, and I am sorry." More than I can ever say. I studied him, noting the lines etched by years of living without me, the slump of his shoulders, the regret in his eyes. 10 years of absence had created a distance that words alone could not bridge. And yet, in this moment, he was offering something I had craved for so long: acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that he had failed me, that he had been wrong. But acknowledgement alone was not enough. I had learned that survival, independence, and self-respect were built through action, not apologies. So I let him speak, watched him spill the weight he had carried, while I remained still, silent, the calm in a storm that had raged for a decade. After several minutes, he wiped his face with the sleeve of his jacket and took a hesitant step closer. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Claire. I just wanted you to know I regret it. I see the person you've become. I see how strong you are. And I am proud, even if I didn't show it before." I nodded slowly, a subtle acknowledgement. Pride. That word had been absent from my life for so long. I had built it myself, in late nights of study, in jobs that pushed me beyond my comfort, in every apartment I had rented, every challenge I had faced alone. I didn't need his pride now. I needed truth. And I had it. I had lived the life he refused to see. 10 years of silence, struggle, and self-determination had given me a clarity that no tearful apology could dilute. "Proud," I echoed softly. "You know, I don't need anyone's pride anymore. I survived without it. I thrived without it, and I built a life that doesn't depend on your approval." His expression faltered, a mixture of sorrow and awe, as if he hadn't anticipated my resolve. And I realized at that moment that our dynamic had shifted irrevocably. I was no longer the scared girl he could dictate terms to. I was my own person, my own success, my own family of choice. We stood in the soft evening light, the wind carrying faint sounds of the neighborhood, and he spoke again. I just wish I had known. I wish I had been there." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I studied him, the man who had chosen absence over support, whose love had come with conditions I could never meet. I weighed the years lost, the opportunities missed, the nights I cried alone. And then I breathed, letting a fraction of the anger soften, not for him, but for me. "You didn't," I said finally. "And that's the past. I can't change it. You can't change it. I survived it. I thrived despite it. And now, if you're here, it's because you want to face it. But understand this, my life is mine. It always was. It just took me a decade to truly claim it." He nodded, eyes glistening, understanding perhaps more than he ever had, though nothing could undo the years. He reached out again, this time tentative, and I allowed a brief, measured touch, a recognition of connection, not submission. The night stretched around us, quiet, the kind of silence that holds both tension and the possibility of understanding. And I realized something fundamental. Confrontation does not always come with anger. Sometimes it comes with quiet, unwavering strength. The kind of strength that does not require validation from those who doubted you, who walked away when you needed them most. That night, we didn't hug for long. We didn't sit and reminisce. There were no long conversations about the years lost or the opportunities squandered. What existed was a space where acknowledgement met independence, where he saw me, not as the girl he disowned, but as the woman I had become, the woman who had turned absence into resilience. In the days that followed, he called occasionally, each conversation tentative, careful. I responded minimally, giving him space to rebuild trust slowly, on terms I set. And I realized that forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about defining boundaries, taking ownership of your life, and allowing others to exist in it only if they respect the structure you've built. My father's tears were not a reset button. They were a window into a remorse I could acknowledge without letting it dictate my future. I had learned to sit in rooms where my achievements were minimized, where my struggles were dismissed, where my presence was tolerated but not celebrated. I had learned to rise above it. And now, 10 years later, I saw him not as a source of fear or shame, but as someone finally facing the reality he had caused. I didn't need him to fix anything. I didn't need him to repay the decade of absence. What I needed was clarity, and he provided it in a simple, human way. By showing up, by admitting fault, by being vulnerable. That was enough. I went to bed that night with a strange sense of calm, a quiet certainty that the world had shifted slightly, not because he changed, but because I had. I was no longer a girl waiting for approval. I was a woman who had built her own life, her own rules, her own home. And he had walked into it, finally seeing me, finally understanding, even if just a little. That moment marked not just a reckoning, but a confirmation. I was not defined by their absence, by their rejection, or by the tears of a man who had once disowned me. I was defined by the life I had built in spite of it. The following weeks were quiet, almost surreal. My father began showing up occasionally, never imposing, always tentative. He would bring small gifts, not to manipulate, but as gestures of acknowledgement. Books I loved, a bottle of wine from a vineyard I had mentioned once, a card with a short note. "Thinking of you, Claire." I kept my responses measured, polite but distant, allowing him entry into my life only on my terms. It was a delicate balance, like walking across a frozen lake. One wrong move, and the old dynamics could snap into place. But something unexpected happened. Each visit, each call, each hesitant conversation reminded me of the growth I had achieved. I realized I no longer needed approval, no longer required validation from the man who had abandoned me at 18. My confidence had been forged in years of struggle, in nights of tears, in mornings of relentless effort. I had paid my dues in resilience, and it was solid, unshakable. One Saturday afternoon, as I worked on a freelance project in my home office, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find him standing there, coat in hand, looking older, wearier, but also steadier, as if he too had begun some kind of reckoning. "Hi," he said, voice soft, unsure. I stepped aside. "Come in," I said. The apartment was small, but warm, filled with plants, books, and the kind of controlled chaos that comes from creating a home on your own terms. He walked in slowly, taking it all in, finally seeing me in the space I had carved out of my life. We sat at the table in silence for a moment, the hum of the city outside like a reminder of the world beyond our personal history. "Claire," he began, "I don't want to disrupt your life. I wanted to see you, really see you." I nodded, understanding that he had finally recognized the boundaries I had established years ago. "I see you," I said, the words simple but powerful. "And I always will if you respect the life I've built." He looked down at his hands, folded neatly in front of him. I regret so many things. Not supporting you, not believing in you, walking away when you needed me most." I didn't respond immediately. There was a weight in his words, heavy with sincerity, but the real impact was in how I chose to receive them. I could accept his regret without letting it rewrite the past. I could acknowledge his remorse without relinquishing the life I had fought so hard to build. That evening, we spoke for hours, cautiously, like two dancers navigating a space that had once been hostile. He asked about my work, my friends, my life in the city, genuinely curious for the first time in nearly a decade. I answered, careful to maintain my independence, but allowing glimpses of connection. There was no pressure, no expectation. Just conversation, a slow bridge being built on terms I set. Over the next few months, this tentative relationship grew. He attended one of my gallery exhibitions, quietly supportive, never overshadowing, never redirecting attention to himself. He called occasionally, each time a reminder of both his absence and his desire to be present. I remained cautious, always aware of the power dynamics, always remembering the girl who had been disowned, the teen who had been abandoned. But I also allowed myself to notice the man he was becoming, the effort he made, the humility he carried. One day, as we walked along the waterfront near my apartment, he spoke softly. "You know, I was wrong. I thought I was tough, but I was just blind. You made yourself strong while I was failing at being a father." I looked at him, the sunlight catching the edges of his face, and felt a quiet peace. "Yes," I said, "I had to, but that doesn't mean you can undo it. You can be here now or not at all. That's the choice you have." And he nodded, understanding that he could no longer control me, could no longer dictate my worth. He could only participate in the life I had built or remain on the sidelines. It was a lesson he learned slowly, painfully, and I watched as he adjusted, as if finally realizing that respect was earned, not given, and that love without boundaries was meaningless. As the months passed, I noticed subtle changes in him. He began volunteering at the local community center, something he had never done before. He started listening more than speaking, acknowledging the experiences of others, and occasionally mentioning lessons he had learned from watching me navigate the world alone. He became quieter, more reflective, less impulsive. And I recognized that the reckoning hadn't just been for me, it had been for him too. My life, which had once seemed fragile without his support, now felt robust, anchored by years of struggle and triumph. I had transformed absence into opportunity, rejection into motivation, silence into strategy. And in this transformation, my father found a glimpse of redemption, not for me, not for his past failures, but for his own conscience. One winter evening, he arrived with a small package. Inside was a framed photograph of me at my graduation, my proudest moment, when I had walked across that stage alone, yet victorious. I took it from him, holding it carefully. "You didn't have to do this," I said. "No," he replied. "I wanted to. I wanted you to know that I see you, even if I didn't before." And for the first time, I allowed a small smile. It wasn't forgiveness yet. It wasn't trust fully restored. It wasn't even relief. It was acknowledgement of progress, of growth, of boundaries maintained and strength affirmed. That night, as he left, I realized something profound. Being disowned, being abandoned, being dismissed, all of it had forged a life I could never have imagined. It had forced me to become unshakable, independent, and unafraid. And when he showed up, crying on my doorstep, it was not just a reckoning for him. It was a testament to the life I had built, the strength I had cultivated, and the freedom I had claimed. In the quiet weeks that followed, I noticed the subtle shifts in our interactions. He would call, check in, ask advice, not because he wanted to control, but because he respected my independence. I would respond, measured, sharing when appropriate, holding back when necessary. It was a dance of boundaries and mutual acknowledgement, a relationship rebuilt slowly on terms of respect, rather than fear or obligation. And I understood something I hadn't fully realized before. The power of being disowned is not in the loss, it's in what you do with the space it leaves behind. I had turned absence into opportunity, pain into resilience, neglect into strategy. I had created a life that was undeniably mine. And in doing so, I had also created a space for him, not as a father who could dictate or diminish me, but as a man who could finally see, acknowledge, and respect the daughter he once rejected. That realization, more than any apology or tear, was the turning point.